So I am pleased to introduce this panel about automated compliance, the solution or a solution. Ivo has just concluded his speech by saying automating compliance of data sharing rules will be crucial for a dynamic data economy. And what I can say, we in Gaia-X have concentrated our attention since day one on this topic, which was presented brilliantly this morning by the technical team, Pierre Grandlier and Roland, and it was presented on the technical aspect. But this specific panel will try to bridge the gap of legal, technical, and economical perspective. The Gaia-X Institute, and that will be presented later on, has been working for more than a year to establish that cooperation between lawyers, engineers, and economists. And a seminal position paper entitled Automated Compliance is available on our site. It is my privilege to introduce our panelists. I'm very proud to have on board today Professor Marianne Frison-Roche, who has been exactly 2 years ago at the first Gaia-X Summit presenting how ex-ante compliance was relevant for data sharing, and Marianne has published since significant contribution to this topic. Next to her is Martine Gourrier. Martine is the Director of Digital Use at EDF, but Martine is also the chair of the working group on label. You have heard about label since this morning, and so that has been the initiative that Martine has been driving. So in the first part of the panel, Martine and Marianne will set up the scene of automated compliance as required by the existence of label, defining, as in the term of Marianne, the goal of ex-ante compliance and the dynamic for label and standards. The next two panelists are Professor Joël Toledano. Joël is a professor, senior professor, I would say, at Dauphine. She is a specialist of the economics of telecommunication. But I guess Joël has something very interesting to bring to us. She has been for 7 years part of ARCEP, the French telecom regulator. So she has seen the movie already once, and probably it's important when we engage in this next round. And next to her is Professor Jacob Rehoff. Jacob is a computer science specialist. He has been the editor-in-chief of the position paper Automated Compliance, I have mentioned. And Joël and Jacob will discuss in the second part of the panel the how of automated compliance. What are the regulations which can be automated? Which limits for automated compliance? And do we need a regulator in data which can act as an intermediary between the regulation, as it has been brilliantly exposed by Ivo, and the courts in the 27 member states which we have to implement it. So, as I said, Ivo will help me to draw the conclusion of this panel, and I immediately hand over to Martine for the first part of the presentation, and Marianne will follow.
So, hello everybody again. So I tried to put in few words, and in words what we have done with this work on labels, because you had this morning the wonderful proof of what can be done on a technical point of view, but I wanted to explain that with plain words. So what we have done with a wonderful group of members, so I thank you warmly, I would say, is that we have a group of members coming from different points of view. We had users, big users and also SMEs. We had providers coming from everywhere in the world, academics, associations, and strong collaboration between all these people, and also strong collaboration between lawyers and engineers. And that's not so easy as Ivo told you, but it's not always simple, but at least the gap has somehow vanished a little bit. So what do we have? We have the needs of users. What do want the users? They want to know exactly what the services are they are using, if they can trust. They want to rely on top services in terms of technical functionalities. They need also transparency. They don't want to be locked. We have really said that. They need to be sure that their data, personal and non-personal, will be protected and not read by somebody else. And they need, of course, their data to be secure. And they want services that bring values, and they want to have the choice of the level of service. What are the needs of the provider, if I may say that? They want to expand their markets. They want to have more customers, of course. And they need to respect the choice of their customers in order to have more of them. And they need to explain what is exactly the service they want to offer. They need to develop also innovation so that their teams can develop new functionalities so that they can expand their market. So, and of course, everybody needs to comply with the law and with the regulation, even if somehow it is a burden. We need to say that if there is too much regulation. So taking into account all these points, we have developed a system of labels with 3 levels of services, and we have currently 62 criteria and 3 levels of labels. So let me give you examples to explain how it works. And I like to take the example of food labels. When you go to the supermarket, you can have your products with your Nutri-Score. So this is for the French one. I know that for Italy it's another point, but let's say Nutri-Score. I don't remember what's the name of Nutri-Score in Italy. And if it, when you take your products, so it tells you if it is a product with, for example, no sugar, very good for your health, or an E product with a lot of sugar, not sustainable, but you, as a customer, you want to be able to buy this E product because you think it is cheap, even if it's not so very good. So you have the choice to choose between your A and E product. So this is exactly the same for our 3 levels of labels. You have the choice to choose between the 3 levels. And you are the customer, and you choose, depending also about, of course, the sensibility of your data. And so we have criteria about transparency, cybersecurity, portability, interoperability, and what we call European control. These criteria, and that's what is important for our discussion today, are technical and also legal. They are mixed. And in fact, we need to have this mixed criteria, and that's the point. So all these criteria have been reviewed by all members of the association. You had a lot of comments at the end. We had, and I'm very grateful for the board of Gaia-X, we had all the final document approved, and we have all these criteria. The point is, coming to the point of automation and so on, that the labels can either be self-processed, we have seen that this morning, or they can be checked by a third party, conformity assessment body, and the main point is that this process is as much automated as possible in order to avoid administrative tasks and also in order to avoid the burden of compliance. So the point of discussion now is to discuss to which extent it can be fully automated. And that's where I lead the point to Marianne.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you to invite me, and I learned a lot during this first day, and it's always a pleasure to meet, for example, engineer, and I try to understand what they said, and I'm sure they try to understand what I say, because it's so difficult to build this bridge between the two space of exercise. And it's so useful for me because I'm only a professor of law. I'm specialized in competition law, in regulatory law, and in compliance law. And it's so useful because, for especially listening to Mr. Ivo Verman and listening to you, Martin, I heard two considerations for the future: one fear and one hope. And I appreciate very much the solution which are articulate. And after that, listening to you, I had the confirmation that compliance techniques, for instance, labeling, are solutions for the future of Gaia-X, but the future for Europe, solution for me, solution provided by Gaia-X. And this fear, I listened, is how will company will be able to comply with all of it? How? And this hope you formulate is the compliance burden will be lower in the future. And I would like to starting with that because it's a big quotation point for me and maybe for you. And I would like to just make 3 remarks. My first point is, this is a crucial importance for the legal solution to articulate the necessary ambition of less compliance burden and the necessity for more regulatory requirements. But that seems a paradox, because the necessity for all companies to comply with so regulatory requirements, with so different, even opposite goals: competition, protection of individuals, GDPR, innovation with more and more requirements. It's a heavy burden. Necessarily, the burden is heavier and heavier. I'm sure you think that. Indeed, the burden, said Mr. Vorman, is the technical tool. Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Built by companies themselves in ex ante, for instance, labeling, explained by you, in correlation with the goals aimed by the European Public Authority. Everything must be in ex ante. For that, we must organize a true and strong and new relationship between law and technology. These technological tools are all in ex ante, built by the companies themselves in this new branch of law, compliance law, which is an ex ante branch of law. This is my second point. Smart contracts, labeling, coordination, data sharing, control are compliance tools. But compliance tools are only pieces of a more global branch of law, which are compliance law. Ivo Vorman spoke about the efficiency of smart contract. Martin explained the great performance of labeling, which is a core compliance tool. This compliance tool takes the unity and unicity, and maybe I can say the simplicity, through this new branch of law, compliance law. I would like to insist on what compliance law is. Compliance by design, certification, labeling, and so on are very pertinent tools. Each is a piece taking its place in this so ambitious and coherent branch of law. In 2020, as you said, in the first meeting of Gaia-X, I had the occasion, thank you very much, to explain how compliance law is so adequate for Gaia-X to organize itself in this perspective of the fundamental goal fixed by public authorities in Europe, such as the European Commission does every day by these very important regulations of data to obtain, to build by a very strong will, a digital Europe. What a monumental good it did. For instance, labeling technique put in place by Gaia-X takes its sense, its spirit by this monumental goal. This ex-ante ambition is not specific to a sector. The data are not inside a specific sector. Therefore, the legal tools are not strictly in the regulatory law, because regulatory law is, by definition, the branch of law inside sectors, energy, banking and financial sector, telecommunication, and so on. But the logic of compliance law is yet the same as regulatory law. Building infrastructure, ensuring durability, exchanging information, offering right of access for every people and transparency and so on, every characteristic of regulatory law is reproduced in compliance law. As in regulatory law, compliance law is built on infrastructure trust, duration, sustainability, interoperability, the sectorial building regulatory law, sector where compliance law was born is exemplary of that. This is my third point. Automated compliance is a part of the world compliance law whose spirit is guarded by courts. These compliance tools, such as smart contracts or labeling, are very precious, notably because they are ex-ante. They will be fully effective in the future because they express not only the conformity, the conformance to the regulations, the simple obedience of the companies to the European legal system, but also, even more, the contribution of the companies to the concretization of this European monumental goal, the sovereignty of Europe. Moreover, compliance law is not only an autonomous branch of law, but of course, compliance law is not the whole legal system. Law doesn't live based on the letter of this text captured by algorithms. Law lives by spirit, united through the interaction between all the branches of law. The spirit is given by the courts, national and European courts, and the institutional doctrine, and so many diverse sources, which machines don't know. For instance, I have the opportunity to give you one example, and maybe you know it. Mr. Schrems appears, and maybe you know the case Schrems. Mr. Schrems appears. And the legal system, totally, it changed. The rule of law, you know maybe the principle, the rule of law, implies that by nature, now and in the future, we are lucky in Europe. It's not like that around the world. We are lucky to live in the rule of law system in Europe. Therefore, law and technology must use compliance firstly as a tool, thanks to algorithms, to secure in ex-ante the action of companies and people who you spoke about, people, and secondly, law and technology must use compliance as a branch to achieve European monumental goal at showing the rule of law, the democracy, and the due process, which are invented and maintained by courts daily.
Martin, a big applause. We do have now the what. Let's enter into the how. And this part of the panel, I will ask a question because speakers have prepared that. So I'll start with you, Jacob, Professor of Computer Science in the Fraunhofer. Jacob, what is the goal of automated compliance in the context of Gaia-X?
Well, from my perspective as a computer scientist, it's about inventing new algorithms, writing new software, and maybe even introducing new uses of specialized hardware to help automate processes involved in either achieving compliance, in checking compliance, or in enforcing compliance for the benefit of all stakeholders of the platform of Gaia-X. Not just about helping the regulator, that too, but also about helping stakeholders, say, deal with contracts that they might have entered into on a free will basis among themselves. But of course, we're also looking towards trying to do something to help compliance in the context of pioneering regulation from the European Union. The idea of regulating software-intensive systems is still a novum, and it is one that the EU system is actually pioneering, in my view, with its latest acts. And anything we can do to help them do that and to help the community exist and prosper with that is I think, a very valuable goal.
Jacob, what are the main challenges?
Well, it might interest you to hear that some of the deepest results coming out of computer science actually have to do with what you cannot do with a computer. There's about 70, 80 years of extremely deep research on that, and so to cut that story very short here, one of the things it means is that there is no super algorithm that can, for example, automatically figure out if a piece of software works, if it's okay, or indeed, if it is compliant with so-and-so. So that's the first part. We can't automate everything, but we know a lot about why we can't, where the limits are, and so forth. So we're going to use that in this context. The second challenge, I think, comes from the fact that we're dealing with a problem or a topic which lies at the interface between law, between legal scholarship and computer science and technology, as Ivo was already mentioned and Marianne has already touched on it. So I think that's one big challenge, but it's also an opportunity because it's an opportunity to do novel things in a field which I think will develop much, much further. Not just the EU, parts of the rest of the world will have to follow the lead of EU here. It may take some time, but it will happen, and then we have an opportunity to do real innovation on that interface.
Okay, that sounds not obvious, to say the least, but at the end, what then can we automate in your mind?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's very important to start being aware of what's already out there. So there's a lot we can do, and of course, Gaia-X has been thinking in this direction from the very get-go. I know Francesco Bonfiglio has been talking about regulation and automation for a long time, and we already heard also that Pierre Grandier has been, and his team have been thinking and working on these things. So we have to look at, for example, RegTech, what's out there. We have to look at the regulated industry. Joël, you'll probably have something to tell us about that as well. There's a lot out there. We can do a lot to automate the paperwork entering into compliance-related fields. We can look at security, think about compliance with cryptographic standards and stuff like that. But we have to go beyond that. In fact, and in particular, we have to tailor it to the concerns of Gaia-X. That is, we have to tailor it towards the topic of digital sovereignty and data exchange. And we've heard this from Ivo already. Smart contracts is something that we can do something about. The Gaia-X trust framework is a very important target where we can make new contributions. That's about extending trust from sort of trusted bases. I mean, you think about, for example, someone wanting to write a service using, let's say, certain trusted resources that are, given to us in the trust framework in the form of so-called verified credentials, for example. I know that this data center has a certain level of quality and compliance, but now I want to write a service on top of that using that, and I'm offering specific kinds of access control mechanisms, authentication mechanisms. So I should be helped in now creating higher level compliance properties for my service. This is really the problem. How do you make trust and compliance propagate up the software stack? That's really the fundamental problem. And that's a very interesting challenge. So I think we can do a lot there. And we have to look at recent advances in computer science. I mean, not just AI, that too, but also I would mention, over the past 20 years, new breakthroughs in the automation of logic, which, by the way, some of the great American companies, I used to be in one of them myself, are making heavy use of, and we should too, for these purposes. Okay.
And Marianne was mentioning that we need to help judge at court. They need to have what we call some legally relevant evidence. What is it?
Yeah, so legally relevant evidence could, for example, be proof that certain tests were performed. Think about penetration tests from the security area, for example. But we need to tailor that again to the area of concern here about data sovereignty. So logs, think about what is written to disk by a firewall, maybe. We need analogs of that sort of information that is automatically being gathered by the system. By the way, this is the sort of information which can be invaluable in forensic contexts in security. And so we need that sort of stuff for compliance. Remote attestation is another topic that's important, just to mention one, and then to repeat, automating the actions and also information coming out of the execution of smart contracts. Those would be examples.
Okay, and what is your suggestion for that to happen? What is needed?
Well, I think from my perspective, there's a lot that should be done, as we already heard. Gaia-X is already working on parts of it. I think one of the contributions that I would like to try to help happen also with the Gaia-X Institute is to reach out into the academic community, both the computer science community, related communities, as well as the legal scholarship community, to help ramp up research of relevance to these concerns. I think this is one of the best contributions we could deliver.
Thank you, Jacob. So we do have now the picture about the how technically. Let's go now with Joël. And Joël, you are an economist. You have been the regulator in France for 7 years. As the former regulator for telecom, would you say that the challenge of the cost of implementing the new set of regulation is new, specific for data regulation or not?
The very simple answer is no. It's really not a new issue. And if I have to give my point of view, when I hear about the burden of regulation, I think it's a little local point of view. For economists, what we call institutional economists, show the importance of institution, the importance of law to have an economic working well. So, but it was just a parenthesis. No, cost issues concern for sure regulated organizations, but it's also an issue for regulators themselves. We heard it from Ivo. What needs to be regulated is increasingly technical and complex. The regulator must therefore become competent, and he too must be able to use the same type of techniques to check compliance with the rules. The code cannot be the law, but it can help to enforce it. And it's not new at all to use technology to do it. And the movement is going stronger and stronger with datafication and intelligence, artificial intelligence. Let me give you 2 or 3 examples, very short. In France, our regulators, telecom, it was the idea of telecom regulator, it was to speak about data-driven regulation. For the regulator, data-driven regulation consists of using the power of information to understand the market and shed light in how it operates in a factual fashion to then steer it more effectively in the right direction and better protect consumers. Another word is very known, you heard for sure it, RegTech. RegTech is using regulatory technology to enhance regulatory and compliance process. For example, for anti-money laundering tools, compliance management, regulatory intelligence. I just used these 3 examples because the 3 main startups are around these 3 competencies. And the British Financial Conduct Authority wrote that RegTech may facilitate the delivery of regulatory requirements more efficiently and effectively than existing capabilities. You have, and it will be the last example I will go on, but also you have a computational antitrust project, and now it's 65 antitrust agencies that want to use IT to go on the automation of antitrust procedure. So no, the challenge of using IT and lowering the cost of implementing new set of regulation is really not new, and IT is part of the solution. But we don't forget that there is also compliance risk. And what is compliance risk? Is the cost of bearing the uncertainty related to the way regulation is created and enforced. So the definition of enforcement cannot come from the regulated company, for sure, it's too risky.
Okay, and because we are talking about data regulation, in your mind, what is specific for data regulation among the generic principles you gave us?
Ivo Volman and Marianne remind us that organizations have to comply with a lot of rules, with Data Government Act, Data Act, GDPR, AI Act, maybe competition rules with DMA, on top the labels with issue of interoperability and so forth. So I think that one thing is new, is specific, is that there are a lot of rules, and that new rules are therefore also sometimes still to be specified, not completely specified. And there are also another point, that is you have different European and national competent authorities and different parties. So that is maybe different, for example, for financial, even if financial is very complex. But last but not least, I will say that something is really specific. Business models for data sharing are still to be defined. What is at the heart of the European data strategy for a data-driven society is data sharing. And as far as I understand, the crucial innovation is maybe more on the data economics than in the data technical. At the beginning, it's not. So to succeed, we need innovation in the data sharing economics, and finding the relevant business model is not a classical issue too, and just until now, there exists very few.
And Joel, to make sure that we have understood, who has to decide what regulation can be automated for compliance? Is it acceptable that the cloud service provider are the one to offer the automated compliance services because they like it?
I think that I answer yet. They don't bear the responsibility for compliance with laws and regulation. So they don't bear as well the compliance risk. The code defined by any third party cannot be the law, but it can help to enforce it with tools that has been defined without conflict of interest and in relation with regulators. When possible, with agreed tools, lowering the cost of regulation means lowering the cost of both the controlled and the controllers, improving the responsiveness of regulators and legal certainty.
Okay, final, what do you suggest to facilitate the data regulation adoption? The question Ivo has raised.
With the complexity I try to figure out, I think that trust third party representing buyers vis-à-vis Commission and various regulators to help defining specification of tools could be the solution. Why not Gaia-X? After, it will be possible to imagine different sorts of tools.
Thank you very much. I would like, and thank you, applause for this second part of the panel. Ivo, are you still around? Can we connect with Ivo if he's still there? Maybe not.
I am around, yes.
Ah, you are there. Can we see Ivo, please? So, Ivo, while they are showing your image on the screen, what would you conclude of this panel?
Yeah, now, wow, that was a really interesting exchange, first of all. Now, we are here amongst believers. So I think we all believe in the importance of automatizing compliance for bringing compliance costs down. I was very much interested in what Marianne dubbed the new relationship between law and technology, a very interesting concept. Now, what I also gather from the panel is that interdisciplinary collaboration in this field can work. For example, Martine's example. Now, I was fascinated by what Jacob said about how insights in the limits of IT can actually be used in this context. I thought that was very, very, very interesting. And then what I retained also from what Joël said was this concept of also lowering the costs of controllers and not only of the controlled, and actually the help of trusted parties to make that happen, and the role she allocated to Gaia-X in making these things happen. I will leave it at that, but thank you very much. This was very interesting.
Thank you. So let me try to summarize, to tell you the only objective of the four panelists and Ivo was to tell you there is a challenge, but this challenge can be sorted out in between believers at the beginning. I like your expression. So what I would like to say is that the commitment we are taking today on behalf of the panelists is to continue on that work to make it practical. We had mentioned this morning, Pierre mentioned third party to help compliance. This is raising all kinds of legal issues, as you can guess, who is responsible at the end. And so what we would like to propose is that the Gaia-X Institute continue in the next 6 months, first 6 months of 2023, and we have agreed with Jacob to organize a workshop where everyone will be invited, not only to raise issues and challenge, but to propose solution onto that, which could be legal solution, economic solution, technical solution. Ivo, we would be delighted if yourself or some of your team could participate to that, because I think we have established today, and thanks to you, that there is a challenge for the European Commission to make this regulation adopted, and every time we can facilitate that and reduce the cost of adoption, it will make it quicker to adopt, and having a regulation which is quickly adopted is the ultimate goal we are all pursuing, okay? So we give you a rendezvous probably in May, June, Jacob, with a conference. I hope we can work in between on those aspects we have raised today, and not only raise challenges in May, June, but bring what are the Gaia-X Institute solutions, which have then to be implemented in the context which was reminded this morning by Francisco, which is we need to have well-designed ideas between putting them into operation. And you all understand that in the operationalization of the data space, this is one of the most crucial challenges we have to sort out in 2023. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, because it has been a very silent and attentive panel, and I would like that you applaud our panelists who have prepared that very, very seriously. Thank you. And thank you, Ivo.